It was a Tuesday like any other at Innovations Mondiales, a thriving company located in the 8th arrondissement of Paris. Employees bustled in the bright hallways of the headquarters, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The smell of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, mingling with the subtle scents of the bouquets placed here and there in the common areas. At the heart of this buzzing hive, Martine Leblanc reigned as undisputed mistress. Managing director of the company for more than 15 years, she was known for her uncompromising character and her keen eye for business. Tall, elegant, always impeccably coiffed, Martine inspired both respect and fear in her employees. His office, located on the top floor of the building, offered a breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower, a symbol of his rise and success. Among the employees, one man in particular stood out, Julien Dupont. Martine's son-in-law, he has held the position of marketing director for 5 years. Despite his family connection with the boss, Julien had always wanted to maintain a strictly professional relationship at the office. Tall, dark, dynamic in his 30s, he was appreciated by his colleagues for his collaborative approach and his sense of innovation. That Tuesday, while Julien presented the latest figures from the advertising campaign to his team, his secretary, Sophie, gently knocked on the meeting room door. "Excuse me for interrupting you, Monsieur Dupont," she said, looking a little embarrassed. "Madame Leblanc would like to see you in her office immediately." A heavy silence fell over the room. The worried looks of her colleagues said a lot about the reputation of Martine's summons. Julien, however, remained calm. He thanked Sophie with a nod and addressed his team. "Continue without me. Pierre, can you continue the presentation where I left off?" Pierre nodded, and Julien left the room, his step confident but his mind in turmoil. What could his mother-in-law want from him? However, the latest results were excellent. The journey to Martine's office seemed endless. In the elevator, he caught the gaze of his reflection in the mirror. He readjusted his tie, smoothed out a stray strand, and took a deep breath. Whatever happened, he had to remain professional. Arriving on the top floor, he nodded to Martine's secretary, who motioned for him to enter directly. The door opened to reveal a spacious office, bathed in natural light. Martine sat behind her imposing mahogany desk, her eyes glued to her computer screen. She didn't look up when Julien entered. "Sit down," she said dryly, without preamble. Julien did so, his heart beating. He knew that tone. It was the one Martine used when she was particularly unhappy. Finally, she looked up at him. His gaze was cold, calculating. "Julien," she began, "I reviewed your department's latest performance reports." Julien stood up, ready to defend the work of his team. But Martine didn't give him the chance. "The numbers are nowhere near what we expected. Your team is expensive and not making enough money. I've decided it's time to make changes." Julien felt his stomach knot. "Martine, if you let me explain." "No need," she cut in. "I have made my decision. You are terminated. Effective immediately." The shock hit Julien like a punch. "Licensed? Him?" He was silent for a few seconds, unable to form a coherent thought. "But, the results of the last campaign were excellent," he finally stammered. "We exceeded our targets by 15%. Martine dismissed the argument with a wave of her hand. "It's not enough. This company needs excellence, not mediocrity. You have until the end of the day to clear out your desk." Julien felt anger rising within him. How dare she treat him like this, after everything he had done for the company? But he controlled himself. This was neither the place nor the time for a confrontation. "Very well," he said simply, rising from his chair. "If it's your decision." He headed towards the door, his hand on the handle, when Martine's voice stopped him. "Oh, and Julien? I'd appreciate it if you'd keep that to yourself at the family dinner tonight. I don't want to spoil the mood." Julien turned around slowly, incredulous. Family dinner. He had almost forgotten it. Every month, the whole family gathered at Martine and her father's house for a meal. The irony of the situation hit him hard. "Of course," he replied, his voice thick with sarcasm. "We wouldn't want the truth to spoil the dessert." With these words, he left the office, leaving Martine alone with her decision. The return to his office was an ordeal. Curious looks from his colleagues followed him, probably wondering what the big boss had said to him. Julian kept his head held high, refusing to show the slightest weakness. Once in his office, he closed the door and collapsed into his chair. The reality of the situation was beginning to hit him. Licensed. At 35 years old. By his own mother-in-law. How was he going to tell his wife, Claire? And to his father? As he began to pack his things into a box, his gaze fell on a photo frame sitting on his desk. It was a photo of the management team, taken at the last company seminar. In the center, Martine, smiling, surrounded by her directors. And him, to his right, proud and confident. It was at that moment that Julian remembered. The safe. The one his father had shown him years ago, shortly after he married Claire. One day you'll need it, he told her. But only when the time is right. Julian jumped up and walked towards the painting hanging behind his desk. He unhooked it, revealing a small safe built into the wall. His hands shook slightly as he put together the combination. The mechanism clicked, and the door opened. Inside, an envelope. Julian grabbed it, his heart beating. He opened it delicately and took out several documents. Property titles. Actions. Lots of action. As he looked through the papers, his eyes widened in surprise. He owned 75% of the company's shares. Julian remained motionless for several minutes, assimilating the information. His father, visionary as always, had foreseen this situation. He had given him the means to protect himself, to protect the company, if necessary. A feeling of calm suddenly came over him. He carefully put the documents in his bag, closed the safe and put the painting back in place. Then, quietly, he finished putting away his personal belongings. When he left the office that evening, it was with his head held high, a slight smile on his lips. Martine thought she had one, but the game had only just begun. In the taxi taking him home, Julian was thinking about his next move. He didn't want to act impulsively, despite the anger still bubbling inside him. No, it had to be strategic. For the good of the company, for his family, and for himself. The taxi driver, a man in his 50s with a jovial face, tried to strike up a conversation. "Tough day, boss?" he asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Julian smiled weakly. "You have no idea," he replied. "But tomorrow is another day." "Ah, that," the driver agreed. "That's what I always say. As long as you have health and you get up in the morning, anything is possible." These simple words resonated in Julian. Yes, everything was still possible. And he was going to prove it. The taxi dropped Julian off in front of a Haussmann building in the 16th arrondissement. Night was beginning to fall on Paris, the street lights lighting up one by one along the avenue. Julian remained on the sidewalk for a moment, observing the facade of the building where he had lived with Claire since their marriage. How was he going to tell her the news? With a sigh, he pushed open the heavy front door and climbed the stairs to the third floor. The familiar smell of their apartment, a mix of old books and lavender, greeted him as soon as he crossed the threshold. "Clear," he called, placing his bag on the entryway console. No response. He then remembered that his wife had a late meeting at the hospital where she worked as a surgeon. A feeling of relief washed over him. He still had a few hours ahead of him to think and put his ideas in order. Julian headed towards his office, a comfortable room tucked away at the back of the apartment. The walls were lined with books, some inherited from his father, others acquired over the years. He turned on his desk lamp, creating a warm halo in the dimness of the room. Carefully, he removed the safe documents from his satchel and spread them out on his desk. The property titles, the shares, everything was there, black and white. 75% of the shares of Innovations Mondiales belonged to him. How could he have ignored it all these years? Julian sank into his leather armchair, his eyes glued to the papers. His mind wandered, going back in time to the day his father had shown him the safe. It was 10 years ago, shortly after his marriage to Claire. His father, Jacques Dupont, summoned him to his office at the family home in Neuilly-sur-Seine. Julian perfectly remembered that sunny June day, the smell of roses from the garden wafting through the open window. "Julian," Jacques had said, his kind gaze fixed on his son, "you are now a married man, and it is time that I entrust you with something important." He then opened a drawer in his desk and took out an envelope. Inside this envelope are some very valuable documents. Company stock, to be precise. Lots of stock. Julian frowned, not really understanding what his father was getting at. "But Dad, I thought it was Martine who held the majority of shares in the company." Jacques had smiled, that enigmatic smile that had always intrigued Julian. "That's what everyone believes, my son. And that's what Martine herself thinks. But the truth is quite different." He then explained to Julian how, over the years, he had discreetly transferred the majority of the shares to his name. "For what?" Julian asked, stunned. "Because I know Martine," Jacques replied. "I love her, but I also know that she can be impulsive, blinded by her ambition. These actions are security, Julian. For you, for the company, for our family." Julian remained silent, assimilating the information. His father then took a key out of his pocket. "This key opens a safe in your office at the company. I had this safe installed there years ago, without anyone knowing. This is where you will keep these documents. One day, you will need it, but only when the time is right." Coming back to the present, Julian rubbed his eyes. How could he have forgotten this conversation? The years had passed, he had focused on his work, on his life with Claire, and his father's revelation had been relegated to a corner of his memory. Now, sitting in his office, Julian understood his father's wisdom. Jacques had planned this day, in a way. He had known that Martine would eventually go too far. Julian got up and walked towards the window. The lights of Paris twinkled in the night, like so many terrestrial stars. He thought of all the employees of World Innovations, their families, their dreams, and their aspirations. He had a responsibility to them all. Returning to his desk, he began scribbling notes on a pad. He had to act, but with caution. A plan began to form in his mind. First, he had to talk to Claire. His wife was not only his most loyal supporter, but also a wise advisor. Together, they could refine its strategy. Second, he needed to consult a lawyer. The legal implications of its position as majority shareholder needed to be clarified. Third, we had to prepare for a board meeting. It was there that he would reveal the truth and regain control of the company. As he finished writing down his ideas, Julian heard the front door open. Claire had returned. "Julian," she called. "You are here." "In the office, sweetheart," he replied. A few moments later, Claire appeared in the doorway. Tall, slender, her brown hair tied in a loose bun, she was still wearing her hospital gown. Her face lit up when she saw Julian, but her smile quickly faded when she noticed his serious expression. "What's going on?" she asked, approaching the desk. Julian took a deep breath. "Claire, sit down. I have something important to tell you." During the next half hour, Julian told Claire everything. The dismissal, the discovery of the actions, the plan that was beginning to form in his mind. Claire listened attentively, her face changing from surprise to indignation to determination. "Julian," she said finally, taking his hands in hers, "you have my full support. What Martine did is unacceptable, and it's time to put things back where they belong." Julian felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. Having Claire by his side gave him the strength he needed. "But," Claire continued, "we have to act smart. Martine isn't going to give up control without a fight." Julian nodded. "I know. That's why I need your help to refine my plan." They spent the next few hours discussing every detail, weighing the pros and cons of each possible action. It was well into the night when they finally went to bed, exhausted but determined. The next morning, Julian woke up before dawn. He dressed silently, not wanting to wake Claire, who was still sleeping soundly. In the kitchen, he made himself a strong coffee and went out onto the balcony. The fresh air of the Parisian morning cleared his mind. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of the Eiffel Tower silhouetted against the sky, which was beginning to lighten. This sight reminded him of his office at Innovations Mondiales, the office that had been brutally taken away from him the day before. But today was a new day. Today he would start to regain control. His first call was to Maître Leroy, the family's lawyer for decades. Despite the early hour, the lawyer responded promptly. "Julian, What's going on? Maître Leroy's voice betrayed his concern. I need to see you, Master. It is urgent and confidential. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. I expect you in my office in an hour, the lawyer finally replied. Satisfied, Julian hung up. He left a note for Claire, informing her of his meeting, then left the apartment. The streets of Paris were still calm at this hour, the first rays of the sun caressing the Haussmannian facades. Julian walked briskly to Maître Leroy's office, located in a beautiful building near the Palais de Justice. The lawyer was waiting for him, a cup of coffee in his hand. Sit down, Julian, he said, pointing to a leather armchair. Tell me what brings you so early. Julian took a deep breath and began his story. As he spoke, Master Leroy's face changed from surprise to intense concentration. Your father was a wise man, the lawyer finally said when Julian had finished. He has it all planned out. What do you advise me, Master? The lawyer stood up and began pacing around his office. Your position is solid, Julian. Legally, you are within your rights to call an extraordinary general meeting and regain control of the company. Julian nodded. It was exactly what he was hoping to hear. However, Master Leroy continued, we must proceed with caution. Martine is not going to go down without a fight. She may attempt to challenge the validity of the actions, or even discredit you personally. What do you suggest? We will prepare a concrete file. Each document, each action will be verified and authenticated. We will also prepare a communication strategy for employees and the media. Transparency will be our best ally. Julian felt a surge of energy pass through him. Finally, things were falling into place. How long will it take? He asked. Give me a week, Master Leroy replied. Until then, keep a low profile. Don't tell anyone about your intentions, not even your family. The less Martine knows, the better. Julian nodded. A week. 7 days to prepare for the battle of his life. Leaving the lawyer's office, Julian felt both nervous and determined. The road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to fight. For the company, for the employees, and for his father's legacy. As he walked along the Seine, watching the bateaux mouches begin their first cruises of the day, Julian realized that his life would never be the same again. But maybe it was for the best. Perhaps it was time to step out of Martine's shadow and take her rightful place at the head of world innovations. The sun was now high in the sky, illuminating the waters of the Seine. Julian stopped for a moment, breathing deeply in the fresh morning air. A new day began, and with it, a new era for Julian Dupont. The week passed like lightning for Julian. Every day was a challenge, a race against time to prepare for his big move. He worked closely with Master Leroy, refining every detail of their strategy. The nights were short, the days intense, but Julian felt the adrenaline flowing through his veins, pushing him ever further. Finally, the D-Day arrived. The Global Innovations shareholder meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room of the headquarters. Julian woke up at dawn, his heart pounding with anticipation. Claire, who had been his rock throughout this week of preparation, served him a strong coffee and kissed him tenderly. You're ready, she told him confidently. Go show them what you're talking about. Julian nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. He put on his most elegant suit, a charcoal grey three-piece that gave him a look that was both serious and modern. In his leather bag, he carefully stored all the documents prepared with Maître Leroy. The taxi ride to World Innovations headquarters was surreal. The streets of Paris passed before his eyes, but Julian had the impression of being in a bubble, isolated from the outside world. He mentally rehearsed his speech, anticipating the possible reactions of Martine and the other shareholders. Arriving in front of the imposing glass and steel building that housed Innovations Mondiales, Julian took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth. He pushed open the revolving doors and walked confidently across the hall, nodding to the security personnel who were looking at him in surprise. After all, he was supposed to have been fired a week earlier. In the elevator that took him to the top floor, Julian caught the eye of his reflection in the mirror. He saw a determined man, ready to fight for what was rightfully his. The doors opened to the hallway leading to the conference room. At the end of the corridor, Maître Leroy was waiting for him, a slight smile on his lips. "Everything is ready, Julian," murmured the lawyer. "Do you have the documents?" Julian patted his bag in response. Together, they pushed open the doors to the conference room. The room was already full. Around the large oval table, the main shareholders and members of the board of directors sat, chatting in hushed tones. At the end of the table, Martine sat enthroned, looking confident and sure of herself. When she saw Julian enter, her face froze in an expression of surprise mixed with anger. "Julian, what are you doing here?" she asked in a sharp voice. All eyes turned towards him. Julian felt a wave of nervousness wash over him, but he firmly pushed it away. It was his moment. "Hello everyone," he said in a clear, confident voice. "I am here as the majority shareholder of World Innovations." A murmur of surprise ran through the assembly. Martine stood up abruptly, her hands flat on the table. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed. "You have no stock in this company. I fired you last week." Julian smiles calmly. "That's where you're wrong, Martine. I have documents here that prove that I own 75% of the shares of World Innovations." He gestured to Master Leroy, who began distributing files to everyone present. Julian observed the faces of the shareholders as they looked through the documents. Surprise, disbelief, then understanding were written in turn on their features. Martine almost snatched the file from Maître Leroy's hands. His eyes scanned the pages frantically, his face turning every shade of red. "It's impossible," she whispered. "Jacques would never." "My father did what he thought was best for the company," Julian replied. "He knew I was best placed to ensure the future of World Innovations." A heavy silence fell over the room. Julian took the opportunity to move towards the end of the table, facing Martine. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I know this revelation comes as a shock to many of you. Believe me, it was to me too when I discovered these documents last week." He paused, looking around the assembly. "But I am here today not to create chaos, but to ensure the stability and continued growth of Global Innovations. Our company has immense potential, and I firmly believe that we can reach new heights if we work together." Julian then unfolded his vision for the future of the company. He talked about innovation, expansion into new markets, investments in research and development. As he spoke, he could see the interest lighting up in the shareholders' eyes. Martine, however, was not ready to give up without a fight. "This is crazy," she interrupted. "Julian does not have the experience necessary to run this company. He will lead us straight into the wall." Some shareholders nodded, visibly agreeing with Martine. Julian knew it was the crucial moment. "I understand your concerns," he said calmly. "It's true, I don't have as many years of experience as Martine at the head of the company. But I grew up with Innovations Mondiales. I have worked in almost every department since I started. I joined the company 10 years ago. I know our strengths, our weaknesses, and above all, our potential." He turned to Martine. "And I don't intend to sideline you, Martine. Your experience is valuable. I suggest that you stay on as a strategic advisor. Together, we can make Global Innovations the undisputed leader in our sector." This proposal seemed to destabilize Martine. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. One of the shareholders, Mr. Dubois, then spoke. "I must admit that I was skeptical at first, Julian. But your vision is impressive. And if these documents are authentic, you have the legal right to take over the management of the company." Other shareholders agreed. Julian felt that the scales were tipping in his favor. "I suggest we vote," suggested Ms. Lefevre, a longtime shareholder. "Who is in favor of appointing Julian Dupont as the new CEO of Global Innovations?" Hands were raised one by one. Julian counted them mentally, his heart beating. When the last hand came up, he realized he had won. The majority of shareholders voted in favor. Martine, pale, remained frozen in her chair. Julian approached her and held out his hand. "Martine, I know it's not easy for you. But I tell you again, I need your experience. Let's work together for the good of the company." For a long moment, Martine stared at Julian's outstretched hand. The entire room held its breath. Finally, with a resigned sigh, She shook Julian's hand. "You better not ruin this," she whispered. Julian nodded, relieved. He turned towards the assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your trust. I promise to do everything in my power to lead global innovations into a bright and prosperous future." Applause broke out in the room. Julian felt a wave of emotions overcome him. He had done it. He had regained control of the company. As the shareholders began to leave the room, Maître Leroy approached Julian. "Congratulations," he said, shaking her hand. "Your father would be proud." Julian nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He thought of his father, of everything he had taught him, of the trust he had placed in him. He wouldn't disappoint him. The day was not over. There was still much to do. Announcements to make to employees, strategies to implement, a transition to manage. But for now, Julian allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He approached the large bay window which offered a breathtaking view of Paris. The sun shone on the city, an omen of better days to come. Julian smiles. A new era was dawning for world innovations, and he was ready to take on the challenge. The days following the shareholders' meeting were a whirlwind of activity for Julian. News of his ascension to the head of global innovations spread like wildfire throughout the company and beyond. Reactions were mixed. Some employees were excited about the change, others worried about the uncertainty it brought. Julian knew he had to act quickly to stabilize the situation and gain everyone's trust. His first action was to organize a general meeting with all employees in the company's large auditorium. On the day of the meeting, the atmosphere was electric. The auditorium buzzed with hushed conversations, speculation, and expectation. Julian, standing backstage, took deep breaths to calm his nerves. Claire was by his side, holding his hand in support. "You're going to be great," she whispered, giving him a quick kiss on the cheek. Julian nodded, grateful. Then, straightening his shoulders, he stepped onto the stage. A silence fell over the assembly. All eyes were on him. Julian looked around the room, recognizing many familiar faces. "Hello everyone," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "I know the last few days have been filled with change and uncertainty for many of you. I am here today to talk to you about the future of global innovations, our common future." He paused, letting his words resonate. "I'm not going to lie to you. There are many challenges ahead of us. But I firmly believe we have the talent, creativity, and determination to overcome them." Julian then unfolded his vision for the company. He talked about innovation, collaboration, expansion into new markets. He emphasized the importance of each department, each employee in achieving this vision. "We are going to invest massively in research and development," he announced. "Our goal is to double our R&D budget in the next 2 years. We want to be at the forefront of innovation, not just following trends, but creating them." A murmur of excitement ran through the assembly. The employees of the R&D department exchanged enthusiastic glances. "But innovation is not limited to technology," Julian continued. "We will also review our internal processes, our approach to customer service, our marketing strategy. Each of you will have the opportunity to contribute to this transformation." He then announced the creation of a continuing education program for all employees, as well as an interdepartmental rotation system to promote versatility and mutual understanding. "I believe in the strength of our diversity," he said. "Each of you brings a unique perspective, valuable skills. By working together, by sharing our knowledge, we can accomplish the impossible." As he spoke, Julian could see the energy in the room change. Worried faces began to light up, enthusiasm replaced distrust. "I know some of you are worried about your jobs," he said, addressing the question on many minds. "Let me be clear, our goal is not to reduce our workforce, but to grow it. We will need each and every one of you to achieve our ambitions." A collective sigh of relief was heard. "However," continued Julian, "I ask you to be ready for change. We will have to be agile, adaptable. Some roles will evolve, new opportunities will be created. I encourage you all to seize them." He concluded his speech by reiterating his confidence in the future of global innovations and in the team that composed it. Together, We will write the next chapter in the history of global innovations. A chapter of innovation, growth, and success. The applause that followed were deafening. Julian felt a wave of emotion overwhelm him. He had managed to reach the troops, to breathe new hope. In the days and weeks that followed, Julian implemented the changes he had announced. He spent long hours meeting each head of the department, listening to their ideas and concerns. He encouraged opening and transparency, establishing weekly meetings where everyone could express themselves freely. One of the biggest challenges was to work with Martine. As promised, he had kept it as a strategic advisor, but the dynamics between them remained tense. Martine had trouble accepting her new role, often contesting Julian's decisions. One day, after a particularly stormy meeting, Julian asked Martine to stay. "Listen," he said once they were alone, "I know that this situation is not easy for you. But I need you, Martine. Your experience is precious for this business." Martine looked at him for a long time, her indecipherable face. Then, with a sigh, she said, "You are right. I was not fair to you, Julian. It's just that. This company was my life for so long." "I understand," replied Julian gently. "And I don't want to erase everything you have accomplished. I want to build on these foundations. Together." It was a turning point in their relationship. From that day, Martine became a precious ally, guiding Julian through the subtleties of the management of a large company. The months passed, and the changes began to bear fruit. The new R&D program gave birth to several promising innovations. The atmosphere within the company had improved considerably, with increased collaboration between the departments. On Friday evening, when Julian was preparing to leave his office, he received a call from a journalist from the magazine Incompetent. "Mr. Dupont," said the journalist, "we have closely followed the changes at the World Innovations in recent months. The results are impressive. Would you accept an interview for our next issue?" Julian accepted, aware that it was an opportunity to share their success and attract new talents. The interview took place the following week. The journalist, a dynamic woman named Sophie Leclerc, posed insightful questions about the transformation of the company. "Mr. Dupont," she asked, "how did you manage to breathe such a change in such a short time?" Julian thinks for a moment before answering. "I believe that the secret was to release the potential that already existed within our team. We had talented, passionate people. They just needed freedom and resources to flourish." The resulting article was complimentary, highlighting Julian's innovative vision and the successful transformation of global innovations. He drew the attention of industry, and soon, the company began to receive partnership proposals from promising startups and large international groups. One evening, while Julian returned home after a long day, he was surprised to find his father, Jacques, who was waiting for him in the living room. "Dad," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Jacques stood up, a broad smile on his lips. "I came to congratulate my son," he said, hugging Julian. "I read the article in Incompetent. I'm so proud of you, Julian." They spent the evening discussing, Jacques listening with interest Julian's stories about the challenges and triumphs of the last months. "You know," said Jacques when the night was well advanced, "when I told you these actions, I hoped that you would do a good job. But you have exceeded all my expectations. You not only saved the business, you made it grow, you made it better." Julian felt his throat hug. "Thank you, Dad. For everything. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Jacques shook his head. "I may have given you the tools, but it was you who built it all. It's your vision, your work." As his father started, Julian stayed on the balcony, contemplating the lights of Paris. He thought of everything that had happened since that fateful day when Martine had dismissed him. The path had been difficult, strewn with pitfalls, but each challenge had made it stronger, more determined. Global Innovations was on a new trajectory, an innovation and growth trajectory. And Julian was ready to guide her to new heights. The future promised to be brilliant, filled with endless possibilities. The months passed, and Global Innovations continued on its positive momentum under the direction of Julian. The company had not only found its stability, but it had also established itself as an innovative leader in its sector. However, despite these professional successes, Julian could not help feeling a certain discomfort. The relationship with her mother-in-law, Martine, although improved professionally, remained tense on a personal level. One autumn evening, while the golden leaves fell slowly on the Parisian boulevards, Julian stayed late in the office, plunged into his thoughts. He contemplated the city illuminated from the large bay window of his office, when a discreet blow at the door drew him from his reverie. "Enter," he said, expecting to see his assistant or perhaps a late colleague. To her surprise, it was Martine who appeared in the frame of the door. She seemed hesitant, almost vulnerable, an expression that Julian had never seen her before. "Martine," he said, unable to hide his surprise. "What are you doing here at this time?" Martine walked through the office, her heels slowly snapping on the parquet floor. "I could ask you the same question," she replied with a weak smile. I thought it was time that we have a real conversation, Julian." Julian felt his heart accelerating. He had been waiting for this moment for months, hoping for an opportunity to really clarify things with his mother-in-law. He made a gesture towards the armchairs near the bay window. "Of course, let's sit down." They settled face to face, the silence stretching between them for a few moments. Finally, Martine took a deep inspiration and began to speak. "Julian, I know that our relationship has not been easy in recent years. And I know that I am largely responsible for it." She paused, looking for her words. "When your father brought you into the business, I was afraid. Afraid that you would not take my place, afraid of losing what I had worked so hard." Julian listened carefully, surprised by this sudden opening. "I saw you as a threat," continued Martine, "instead of seeing the talent and the passion you brought. And for that, I'm really sorry." These words touched Julian more than he would have imagined. He had always admired Martine for his strength and intelligence, even when their relationship was at the lowest. To hear him apologize was both surprising and deeply moving. "Martine," he replied gently, "I understand. I should have been clearer on my intentions from the start. I never wanted to replace you or decrease your achievements. I always wanted to work with you, learn of you." Martine nodded, her eyes brilliant with contained emotion. "I see it now. In recent months, you have done a remarkable job, Julian. You have made decisions that I would never have dared to take, and they have borne fruit. The company was never been as strong." Julian felt a wave of gratitude overwhelm him. "It is thanks to you too, Martine. Your advice, your experience. They were crucial to navigating in these unknown waters." A comfortable silence settled together, each assimilating the words of the other. Then Martine gained the floor, her voice tinged with a note of humor. "You know, when I dismissed that day, I would never have imagined that things would run like this. I really thought I did what it was necessary for the company." Julian could not help laughing. "And I would never have imagined finding myself CEO a week later. Life sometimes has surprises in stores." They laughed together, and suddenly, the tension accumulated over the years seemed to dissipate. They began to speak more freely, evoking family memories, anecdotes on the company, projects for the future. Throughout the conversation, Julian realized how much Martine had changed. She was no longer the cold and distant woman he had known. She seemed more open, more human. He wondered if it was the fact of having dropped the reins of the company which had enabled him to soften, or if this facet of his personality had always been there, hidden under a shell of responsibilities and stress. "You know," said Martine after a while, "I never really took the time to know you, Julian." "Not really. I have always seen you like Claire's husband, or as an employee. Never really like a family member." These words touched Julian in the heart. "It is never too late to change that," he replied gently. Martine nodded, a sincere smile illuminating her face. "You're right. What would you say about dinner together this weekend? You, Claire, your little Lee, at home. It's been too long since we had a real family meal." Julian felt a puff in joy invade him. "It would really make me happy, Martine. I'm sure Claire and Leah will be delighted too." They spent a moment discussing the details of the dinner, then Martine got up to leave. Before leaving the office, she turned to Julian. "Thank you," she said simply. "For this conversation, for your forgiveness, for everything you have done for the company. I am proud to have you as a stepson, Julian. Julian got up and, in an emotion of emotion, hugged Martine in his arms. She appeared surprised for a moment, then returned her embrace. After Martine's departure, Julian stayed in his office for a while, his heart light. He had the impression that a huge weight had just been removed from the shoulders. He took his phone and called Claire to tell her of the good news of the dinner to come. The weekend arrived quickly. Julian, Claire, and their daughter Leah presented themselves at Martine, a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine in hand. The atmosphere was initially a little tense, each not knowing how to behave in this new family dynamic. But over the evening, the ice broke. Martine turned out to be a warm hostess, attentive to her granddaughter Leah, and sincerely interested in the life of Claire and Julian outside of work. They talked about everything and nothing, evoking family memories, laughing shared anecdotes. At one point, while Claire helped Martine rid the table, Julian found herself alone with her daughter in the living room. Leah, from the age of 6, looked up at her father. "Dad," she said, "why was Mamie Martine was mean before and now she is kind?" Julian was taken short by the insight of his daughter. He thinks for a moment before answering. "You know, my darling, sometimes adults make mistakes. They can be sad or be afraid, and that makes them act in a way that is not nice. But what is important is that they recognize their mistakes and try to correct them." Leah seemed to meditate on these words, then nodded with all the wisdom of her 6 years. "Okay. I like it when she's nice like that." Julian smiled and hugged his daughter in his arms. "Me too, my chip. Me too." The rest of the evening took place in a warm and relaxed atmosphere. When the time came to leave, Martine accompanied them to the door. She hugged in her arms, kissed Leah tenderly, then turned to Julian. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice slightly trembling with emotion. "It means a lot to me." Julian smiled warmly. "It was a wonderful evening, Martine. We are doing this soon?" Martine greeted with enthusiasm. "Absolutely. And next time, it's your home." On the way back, in the car, Claire took Julian's hand. "It was a beautiful evening," she said slowly. "I would never have thought to see this day arriving." Julian hugged his hand. "Me neither. But I'm happy that it happened. It's like our family is finally complete." Coming home, Julian realized how much his life changed in the space of a few months. Not only had he managed to straighten the business, but he also managed to reconcile his family. He felt full of a feeling of fullness that he had never known before. That night, before falling asleep, Julian thought of his father. He promised to call him the next day to tell him about the evening. He knew that Jacques would be delighted to learn that the family was finally reunited. As he closed his eyes, Julian felt deeply grateful. For his family, for his work, for the challenges that had made him grow. The future promised to be radiant, full of promises and new possibilities. And this time, he knew that he could count on the support of his whole family to face what life would hold him. The months following reconciliation between Julian and Martine were an extraordinary growth period, both for Global Innovations and for the DuPont family. The company, carried by a new synergy between experience and innovation, reached unpublished heights. Julian, with the renewed support of his family, approached each challenge with renewed confidence and determination. One spring morning, while the cherry trees bordering the Avenue des Champs-Élysées announced the revival, Julian summoned an extraordinary meeting of the board of directors. The excitement was palpable in the conference room, everyone wondering what new initiative was going to be revealed. Julian, standing in front of the assembly, took a deep inspiration before starting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice resonating in the room, "since I took the direction of Global Innovations, we have accomplished extraordinary things together. We have not only overcome the challenges that stood before we, but we also opened new paths, pushed the limits of what we thought possible." He paused, scanning the attentive faces that surrounded him. Martine, sitting at the forefront, gave her an encouraging smile. "Today," continued Julian, "I'm here to present our vision for the future. A vision that will not only transform our business, but which has the potential to change the world." An excitement whisper crossed the assembly. Julian activated the giant screen behind him, revealing a series of futuristic graphics and images. Our project is called Ecosphere, he announced. This is an ambitious initiative aimed at creating autonomous and lasting urban ecosystems. Imagine whole cities operating only with renewable energies, where each building produces more energy than it consumes, where waste are transformed into resources, where nature and technology coexist in harmony. The members of the council exchanged impressed looks. Julian continued his presentation, detailing the different components of the project: new generation solar panels, ultra-effective rainwater recovery systems, vertical gardens integrated into the facades of buildings, autonomous electric transport networks. This project, explains Julian, will combine all our expertise. Our technological division will develop the necessary intelligent systems. Our engineering department will design infrastructure. Our design team will create aesthetic and functional living spaces. And our new division of biotechnology will work on solutions to harmoniously integrate nature into these urban environments. While Julian continued to expose the details of the project, the enthusiasm in the room was palpable. Even the most conservative members of the council seemed to be conquered by the magnitude and audacity of the vision. Of course, concludes Julian, such a project will require considerable investments and will include risks. But I firmly believe that it is the management that we must take. Not only to ensure the future of our business, but also for contribute to a better world for future generations. When Julian ended his presentation, a contemplative silence reigned for a few seconds. Then, slowly, the applause began, gaining intensity until it becomes a standing ovation. Martine was the first to speak once calm. Julian, she said, his voice full of pride, this project is extraordinary. He perfectly embodies the spirit of innovation and social responsibility which has always been at the heart of global innovations. You have my total support. The other members of the council followed, expressing their enthusiasm and support. The Ecosphere project was approved unanimously. In the following weeks, the announcement of the Ecosphere project made a sensation in the business world and beyond. The media grabbed history, presenting Julian as a daring visionary at the head of a green revolution. The requests for interviews flocked, the investors were jostling to participate in the project. But for Julian, real work was just beginning. He knew that transforming this vision into reality would be the greatest challenge of his career. He spent the following months to build teams, to build strategic partnerships, to negotiate with the authorities to obtain the necessary authorizations. One evening, when he worked late in his office, Julian received an unexpected call. He was the mayor of Paris. "Mr. Dupont," said the mayor, "I closely followed your Ecosphere project. I am impressed by your vision and I think Paris could be the ideal place to launch this revolutionary project. How about collaboration to transform a district of our beautiful city into a durable urban planning model?" Julian felt his heart accelerated with excitement. It was an incredible opportunity, a chance to materialize your dream in your own city. "Mr. Mayor," he replied, "I would be honored to work with you on this project. Paris has always been at the forefront of innovation and culture. It is time that she also becomes an urban sustainability model." The months that followed were intense. Julian juggled the daily management of global innovations, the development of the Ecosphere project, and negotiations with the Town Hall of Paris. The days were long, the challenges numerous, but Julian felt more alive than ever. Claire was an unwavering support during this period. She understood the importance of what Julian was trying to accomplish and encouraged him at each stage. Even little Leah was enthusiastic about the project, drawing colorful cities of the future that Julian proudly posted in her office. Martine, on the other hand, actively involved in the project. His experience and contacts in the business world proved to be precious to overcome bureaucratic and financial obstacles. The relationship between Julian and Martine, formerly so tense, had turned into a solid and mutually beneficial partnership. 1 year after the initial announcement of the Ecosphere project, Julian was held on a podium in the 13th arrondissement of Paris. Behind him, an industrial wasteland stretched as far as the eye can see. In front of him, a crowd of journalists, dignitaries, and curious citizens were looking forward to it. "Ladies and gentlemen," began Julian, his voice carried by the speakers, "today marks the beginning of a new era for Paris, for France, and I dare hope, for the whole world. On this ground which carries the scars of our industrial past, we will build the future. He made a gesture towards the field behind him. In the years to come, you will see the first ecosphere district stand up here. Buildings that produce more energy than they consume, streets where cars give way to pedestrians and bikes, spaces greens that purify the air and nourish the inhabitants. The applause broke out in the crowd. Julian saw Claire and Leah in the front row, their faces radiant with pride. Martine was standing next to them, applauding with enthusiasm. While the launch ceremony continued, Julian could not help thinking about the path traveled. Barely 2 years ago, he was about to be dismissed, uncertain of his future. Today, he was at the head of a project that could change the world. Later in the evening, while the family celebrated Julian and Claire, Jacques raised his glass to wear a toast. "To my son," he said, his eyes brilliant with emotion, who not only saved the family business, but who propelled him towards new peaks. "To Julian, who shows us that success in and social responsibility can go hand in hand." Julian felt a wave of emotion overwhelm him. He looked around, seeing the smiling faces of his family. Claire, her rock, still by his side. Leah, whose future would be shaped by decisions made today. Martine, formerly opponent, now a precious ally. And his father, whose confidence and foresight had made it possible. "Thank you all," said Julian, the voice charged with emotion. "This success is not only mine. It is ours. We have built it together, and together, we will continue to build a better future." While the evening continued, filled with laughter and lively conversations, Julian felt invaded by a deep feeling of gratitude and accomplishment. The path had been long and sometimes difficult, but each test had made it stronger, wiser. The future was full of promises and challenges, but Julian knew that with his family by his side and the force of world innovations behind him, he was ready to face them. The trip was just beginning, and Julian was looking forward to seeing where he would take them.